Vikram provided a much-needed source of evidence for a much-needed alternative way to communicate and in a part of the spectrum that has been completely neglected in research and in resources and so on, the non-speaking community. And his work provided the first sound piece of evidence in the scientific community. We had evidence in the clinical community, but you need to have this scientific evidence, and he did so beautifully in a paper that we all enjoyed very much. And today, I hope that you get to talk a little bit about that as well. But let's start and get you. That was an amazing piece of work that opened up a whole new door to research in this area.
Well, thank you, Liz. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm so excited to be here and to share with you some of the work we've been doing to better support autistic non-speaking folks to flourish. I want to begin by asking you to imagine for a moment that you never developed the ability to speak. Even after years or decades of speech therapy focused on speech and joint attention and all the rest, you still couldn't say anything. Or maybe you could talk a little bit, but you weren't able to communicate effectively using speech. And you were never provided an effective alternative to speech. So you had no way to communicate your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, or desires. Layer on top of that you were autistic. So you have sensory and motor differences of the type we've been hearing about today. Damaging assumptions are made about you on the basis of behavior that you have no control over. If speaking autistic people are denied access to education and community and social opportunities and employment, imagine how challenging this is for the 30% of autistic people who are non-speaking. We don't know yet why some autistic people don't learn to speak effectively, but the most likely explanation has to do with the motor differences. And of course, this has already been the subject of a lot of the presentations that you've heard today. So over the past several years, my students, colleagues, and I have had the real privilege of collaborating with non-speaking people and the non-speaking community on a number of projects. We take as our approach in our work the opportunity to first spend considerable time with members of the community, learning their interests and concerns, and then trying to apply the tools of cognitive science in order to address some of the concerns that they've raised. Our goal is to conduct meaningful research that can be used to support autistic flourishing. So today I'm going to tell you about 3 recent lines of work inspired by this participatory approach, each focused on a topic that, of course, is absolutely essential to this community, and that's access to effective communication. So I'll tell you about some work that Liz alluded to, investigating one way that some non-speaking autistic people have learned to communicate. I'll tell you about a second line of work that addresses questions about literacy, and a third that asks whether augmented reality could be a useful tool for non-speaking autistic folks. As you'll see, in each of these 3 domains, our findings challenge some conventional and scientific wisdom about non-speaking autistic people. So to set the stage for the research I'm going to be telling you about, I want to show you a video that features a community engagement seminar that I taught for a number of years at the University of Virginia in collaboration with Elizabeth Vossler. The seminar was called The Science and Lived Experience of Autism, and you can see pictures of the 3 cohorts here. Each year, a group of 20 undergraduates and 10 college-age, non-speaking, autistic young adults participated in this seminar, where we got to know each other a little bit, we laughed a lot, and the undergraduates and I had the opportunity to learn about autism alongside people who are living it. I'm Vikram Jaswal. I'm an associate professor of psychology at the University of Virginia. For the past 3 years, I've been teaching this 2-semester seminar called The Science and Lived Experience of Autism. We try to explore the tension between what the science says about autism and what the lived experience of autism is like.
We work as a class of about 16 students with a partner cohort of non-speaking autistic individuals.
They don't use spoken language reliably, or in some cases, at all. And something that happens as these guys are spelling out their responses is that the non-autistic participants, we all learn to slow down.
What we do is we come prepared with a reading or maybe a video clip that we've all watched, and then we spend the entire day kind of digging into what we got out of it, both from a neurotypical perspective and an autistic perspective.
They basically showed that there was no significant eye fixation difference between the two groups, which is a very surprising finding.
A, C, T. I find the obsession with eye contact, and G, to be annoying, M, A, L. I believe it is about NTs wanting us to look normal.
One of the goals is to get students to think about, what do you do when the science doesn't match the lived experience?
It's a really wide misconception that if you're not displaying interest in a neurotypical way, if you're not, for instance, making eye contact, or you're not verbalizing something that you want to verbalize, you're just not interested in engaging.
But when you actually talk to these guys and you spend time with them, you find that for many of them, nothing could be further from the truth. They're longing for social connection, they want to make friends, but their bodies just aren't able to cooperate in a way that allows them to do it.
I think the most shocking thing continues to be how wrong I was about what it looks like to be listening and what it looks like to be interested.
For the most part, the educational experience of autistic folks is one of separation from their typically developing peers. And I see our seminar as an example of how we can create an inclusive educational environment. Part of what has to happen is for society to make accommodations for the neurotypical folks to learn ways to support autistic people as they are.
If we come in with a baseline of, let's just see what this person can do, trust their capabilities, trust their interest, then I think we create way more inclusive spaces because we don't bring in all of these preconceived notions about what someone can and can't do.
So teaching this seminar and getting the chance to spend so much time with and learn from non-speaking autistic people's lived experiences really transformed my research program. And I should say that it was transformative to a lot of the undergraduates as well. In terms of the research I'm going to be talking to you about today, one of the things you surely noticed in the video was that the non-speaking students communicated by pointing to letters on a letterboard held vertically by a trained communication and regulation partner. So for shorthand, I'll sometimes refer to this person as an assistant. Before we go any further, I just want to emphasize 2 important points. The first is that this ability to communicate in this way is a motor skill that you'll hear Elizabeth talk about in the next presentation, that some non-speaking autistic folks have learned how to do after years of practice. It's not something that they sat down to do overnight. It's not something that they learned in a couple of days. It took years of practice. And the second important point is that all of the spellers who currently benefit from the support of an assistant are working on the skills to be able to type independently. That is certainly one of their goals, and you don't have to look very far to find people who have succeeded in that goal. Okay, so I want to show you an example of a fluent speller who spells on the letterboard. In this video, you'll see a woman who was 22 at the time the video was taken respond to a question about whether she'd ever experienced uncertainty. So she's wearing a camera that allows us to record her movements from her perspective. I just want you to pay attention to how quickly she spells her response, how confident she seems for the most part, and really how insightful her response to this question, have you ever experienced uncertainty, is.
Have you ever experienced uncertainty?
E-V-E-R-Y, very, O-N-E, everyone. D-O-E-S-I-M-N-O-D-I.
Keep going. D-I.
F-F-E-R-E-N-T. Different.
Everyone does. I'm no different. So as you may know, there are critics who insist that non-speaking individuals who communicate in the way you just saw could not possibly be conveying their own thoughts. They think that the assistant is somehow cueing the user to particular letters or moving the letterboard under their finger in some kind of a Ouija board-like fashion. I think what this position reflects is disbelief that someone who cannot communicate effectively using speech, who's autistic, who moves in unusual ways, who may act in socially non-normative ways, could have sophisticated thoughts like everyone experiences uncertainty, I'm no different. I think it also suggests that the critics haven't actually had the opportunity to spend much time with non-speaking autistic folks who spell. Unfortunately, however, the critics have succeeded in preventing non-speaking autistic people from having access to this and related methods in schools and other settings. The non-speaking folks that I know, including those in the seminar I've taught over the years, are absolutely aware of these critics. And they're absolutely aware that their communicative agency has been questioned or denied. And it's taken an incredible mental toll on them. Imagine being denied access to the only effective means of communication you have. Not being supported in school to use it, and having no way to participate or gain in education. And all this because a small but strangely influential group of people who've never met or interacted with you has decided that you could not possibly be conveying your own thoughts. So we set out to do a study to see how plausible the critics' objections were. Are users somehow being directed to each letter they point to? Is the board being moved underneath their finger? This was work done in collaboration with Allison Wayne, who was an undergraduate at the time, and Hudson Galino, who's a quantitative psychologist at the University of Virginia. We recruited a group of non-speaking autistic young adults who communicate in this way and fitted them with eye-tracking glasses, like you see here, that would allow us to record what they looked at and pointed to. And we asked them to spell responses to a bunch of questions. Now, we know from over a century of research in psychology that responding to a cue takes time and is subject to error. So to take a simple example, imagine we're having dinner, and I want you to check out the shoes of the person at the table next to us. I might give you a subtle cue. That would take time. You would have to detect the cue. That would take time. You'd have to bring up how to interpret that cue, which would take time. And then, at least in my family, there would be a lot of confusion and error. So if participants spelled slowly or took a lot of time, made a lot of mistakes, cueing might be a plausible explanation. In fact, we found that spellers' accuracy and their speed profile makes cueing by the assistant an unlikely explanation for their performance. Spellers rarely misspelled a word, and as you saw in the clip I just showed you, they spelled at a pretty fast clip, about 1 letter each second on average. We also know from decades of research in cognitive science that people look at things before they touch them. Why? Because you're going to be much more accurate in adjusting your movements toward the target if you can use visual feedback. So to take a simple example, if you close your eyes right now and try to touch the nose of the person sitting next to you, good luck. You might end up in the right vicinity, but you're unlikely to be on the nose, as it were. So we asked whether users looked at letters before touching them. If they do, we can say that they're not just holding out their finger and waiting for the assistant to move the board underneath their finger, but they are actively selecting letters that they point to themselves. So here's an example. This participant is a man who was 26 at the time the video was taken. Here I've overlaid the eye tracking information. It's represented by the red dot you can see down here on the letter W. So in this particular frame, the user is looking at the letter W. That's represented by the red dot, and he's pointing to it. To be clear, nobody sees this red dot during the session. It's only visible in the video that's produced after the session has ended. So what I want you to note in this video is how clearly the red dot, representing where he's looking, precedes his point to each letter. And in the course of a conversation about waiting, he was asked to name something he'd had to wait 4.
W, A, I, T, I, N, G, waiting, F, O, R, 4, M, Y, my, D, R, E, A, M, G, I, R, L. Waiting for my dream girl.
Waiting for my dream girl. So that clip clearly illustrated that spellers look at letters before pointing to them, and our analyses show that they do so about half a second before pointing to each letter. So together, the accuracy, timing, and visual fixation data we collected are consistent with what you'd expect if participants were communicating their own thoughts. They are not consistent with the cueing explanation that the critics have put forward. I have to be clear here that I'm not suggesting that everybody is going to benefit from the use of a letterboard to be able to communicate effectively. Clearly, different people are going to benefit from different kinds of support. But our data show that the blanket dismissal of this kind of communication method is unwarranted. Okay, I want to turn to the second line of work I'll describe today. It's a study we just completed, and I'll give you a sneak peek at the data, investigating literacy in non-speaking autistic people. This was done in collaboration with 2 graduate students, Andrew Lampy and Caden Stockwell. In this study, we asked whether some non-speaking autistic folks have learned to spell. And you might say, doesn't the fact that there are some people who communicate by pointing to letters on a letterboard already show that they've learned to spell? Yes, but it's important to have converging evidence from multiple methods, particularly given the charged atmosphere that surrounds assisted forms of communication. So we developed a method to investigate one important aspect of literacy, namely whether non-speaking autistic people could convert the sounds of language, the phonology, into its written form, the orthography. Our method was inspired by the Whack-A-Mole arcade game, popular in the 1980s and 90s. So if you remember, that's a game where you were just supposed to whack each mole with a mallet. It would pop up in random positions, and you would just hit it as fast as you could. And that would increase your score. To my knowledge, the moles popped up in random locations, but imagine how much faster you would have been, how many more points you could have gotten in tickets at the arcade if you had been able to know in advance what the sequence in which these moles would pop out of their holes was. So I want you to put a pin in that. Participants in our study saw letters of the alphabet displayed on an iPad like you see here, and they were simply to tap whatever letter they saw pulsing as quickly as they could. On some trials, participants were told the sequence in which the letters would pulse, as in this example, I should water the backyard today. Because they'd heard the sequence in advance, if participants could spell, they could anticipate where the next pulsing letter would be. We compared how quickly participants responded to pulsing targets in this letter condition with a condition involving meaningless symbols. Here, the targets pulsed in the same locations and the same sequence as in the letter condition, but because the targets were meaningless symbols, regardless of whether participants could spell, they would not be able to predict where the next pulsing target would appear. So our question was whether participants would be faster to tap the pulsing targets in the letter condition compared to the closely matched symbol condition. We conducted this study with 31 non-speaking autistic adolescents and adults. Our participants had experience learning to use a letterboard, but I want to emphasize that this study was conducted entirely on an iPad secured on a stand in front of them. So no one held the iPad or touched the participant. The task was simply to respond as quickly as possible to each target. So were participants faster in the letter condition than the symbol condition? Yes, absolutely. On average, they were faster. You can see this very clearly in the individual data. In this figure, each dot represents one participant, and dots below 0 mean that they were faster in the letter condition than the symbol condition, and dots above 0 mean that they were faster in the symbol condition than the letter condition. So you'll see most of the dots are below 0. 23 out of 31 participants, it's about 75%, were faster on trials involving the letters compared to those involving symbols. We had 12 folks who could not speak at all, and the other 19 who could speak a bit, and you can see that in both groups, most participants were faster to the symbol condition than the letter condition. So these data suggest that most participants in our study, including those who do not speak at all, have acquired an important aspect of literacy, the ability to convert the sounds of language into their written form. Of course, we don't know how they learned to do this. It may be that learning to communicate by pointing to letters was an important part of that process, so that'll require more work. I want to turn now to the third and final part of my talk, which is about the promise of augmented reality to support non-speaking autistic people. This is a project done in collaboration with Divakar Krishnamurthy at the University of Calgary in electrical engineering, a team of his students, along with several students in my own lab, including Chelsea Rohde, Kate Kaufman, and Julia Bondi. Let me begin by just telling you briefly what augmented reality is. Augmented reality differs from virtual reality in that you can place holograms into a user's actual physical space, so it's not a totally immersive experience. This is a cool demo from Microsoft. It's fun to interact with these objects in various ways, but this technology can be used for educational content. Like here you can see someone interacting with elements in the periodic table, looking at their atomic structure and so forth. Why would we be interested in using AR with non-speaking autistic people? Well, I think the most straightforward answer is, why shouldn't non-speaking autistic people have access to the same cool technology as everybody else? Also, there are some aspects of AR that may make it an attractive learning tool for this group, including the ability to customize the holograms, to make them even move around with an individual so that, say, a communication device would always be within somebody's reach. You can create game-like modules to practice the motor skills that might be important for being able to type. Our first step in this project was very basic. We wanted to investigate whether non-speaking autistic people could tolerate wearing the device. It weighs over a pound, and you definitely can feel it on your head. And also we wanted to know whether they could learn to interact with the holograms. No one had ever done this kind of feasibility or usability study, in part because I think of assumptions that, well, of course non-speaking people would never be able to do this. We showed that that was incorrect. So with the collaboration of non-speaking folks in the community, we developed a protocol to introduce users to the HoloLens, and then we developed a game that involved pushing holographic buttons to see an animation of a Fox hologram. There were 3 rounds in this game that became increasingly difficult. The buttons got increasingly smaller, and you had to do things more quickly. You had to push buttons more quickly. So we tested a group of 17 non-speaking autistic young adults on this feasibility study. Our first question was whether they would be willing or able to tolerate the device. The answer is absolutely. 15 out of 17 wore the device long enough to start the game, and 10 actually completed the game without taking any breaks. The next question was whether these folks could learn to push holographic buttons. Here the answer was also yes. All 15 of those who started the game completed at least 2 of the rounds, and 11 out of 15 completed all 3 rounds. And the other interesting feature is that subjects got faster on the subsequent rounds, even as those rounds became more difficult. So they were able to transfer what they learned about holographic buttons from one round to the next, more difficult round. We think our findings open up exciting new possibilities for the design of AR software for non-speaking autistic people, including software focused on building skills that underlie alternative forms of communication. Let me just give you a teaser of one of the things we've been working on. This is work led by Laurence Alaboud, who's a postdoc in Dr. Krishnamurthy's lab at Calgary. Laurence asked whether it would be possible to create a virtual letterboard that users could interact with. Something that might allow them to practice the skills involved in spelling, maybe to receive remote instruction from a practitioner in a different location, and more. I'm not going to go into all the details here, but I'll show you one final video that illustrates one vision for this project. So this is a split screen video. There's a user who's wearing a device and an assistant who's also wearing a device. This is actually just a prototype. This isn't a real participant. So what you see on the left is the view that the user sees, and what you see on the right is the view that the assistant sees. Both are wearing the device, as I said. And you're going to hear me invite Kate Kaufman, my lab manager, to spell Hello, New Jersey. All right, Kate, spell Hello, New Jersey. H-E-L-L-O-N-E-W-J-E-R-S-E-Y. Hello, New Jersey. We can increase or decrease. You can make it smaller, bigger. You can do, as Elizabeth would say, a hard reset. So I've told you a little bit about 3 projects that we've been working on in collaboration with non-speaking folks. I think our findings contradict some conventional and scientific wisdom about what non-speaking people are capable of. You know, people are sometimes surprised that we're able to conduct research with non-speaking people that asks that they wear devices on their heads or that they complete a speeded task as quickly as they can. And they say, how do you do this? And the answer is, or the short story is, we collaborate. We've lost the video. There we go. We collaborate with the community from start to finish, addressing questions that are of interest to them. We take the time to get to know our participants. We presume competence in them. We talk directly to them. And we make whatever accommodations we can to ensure that they can feel comfortable and perform at their best. After all, we're not collecting these data for our own benefit. We're collecting these data for the benefit of our participants, and we hope people like them. So of course we want to get an accurate picture of them as we can. As we learn more about autism, particularly from autistic people, we're also learning how little we understand about it and how many of our assumptions about autistic people are wrong. These incorrect assumptions are not just incorrect, they have real negative consequences on the way autistic people are treated. I want to thank the non-speaking people I've had the privilege of getting to know for helping to move autism science in a progressive, data-driven direction, and also to thank the participants in our studies for their enthusiastic participation. Thanks also to the funders of this work, including the Akil Autism Foundation and the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, all the research assistants in my lab, and the folks in Calgary. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Vikram. That was amazing and much needed. And as I said before, this has opened a path to research, a path to a new methodology and considering new avenues and teaching us about the non-speaking community that we've been prevented really from interacting with, from understanding. So this work is groundbreaking and fundamental.